vivid versions.
The digital notification on my wrist gave a soft, haptic pulse at exactly 10:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. I didn't look at it immediately. I was in the middle of a recursive code audit for a legacy banking system, and the rhythm of the logic was far more satisfying than whatever recruitment ping had just hit my inbox. I finished the block, committed the changes, and finally tapped the screen. It was a message from a headhunter at Sterling Infrastructure, a man named Marcus who had been attempting to penetrate my professional perimeter for the better part of a month. Usually, these inquiries are noise. They offer lateral moves for an extra 10% and a dynamic office culture that translates to an open plan room full of beanbags and underpaid 20-somethings. But Marcus had been persistent, and his latest message contained a PDF attachment labeled Project Aegis, Lead Architect. I opened the file. The numbers were the first thing I analyzed. A base salary of $310,000. A performance-based multiplier that could reasonably push the total compensation past $400,000. Full equity vesting over 4 years. Platinum tier health benefits. A relocation stipend that felt more like a small lottery win. The role was lead cybersecurity architect for a regional data fortress, a Tier 4 facility built into a decommissioned limestone quarry near a town called Fairhope. I pulled up a map. Fairhope was a coastal enclave of roughly 6,000 people, 3 hours from the nearest airport and 5 hours north of the sprawling, humid metropolis I currently called home. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window of my 12th floor office. Below, the city was a chaotic grid of congestion. I could see the steam rising from the vents, the endless crawl of taxis, and the shimmering heat reflecting off the glass towers. My current firm paid me $95,000. It was enough to sustain the life my wife, Violet, demanded, but only just. We lived in a curated apartment with a view we couldn't afford to enjoy because I was always working, and she was always spending the surplus on artisan ceramics and gala tickets for charities that seemed to exist primarily to give wealthy people a reason to wear silk. That evening, I sat at our polished mahogany dining table. The apartment smelled of expensive lavender candles and the faint, chemical scent of the high-end floor wax Violet insisted upon. I had the offer letter printed out. I preferred paper for moments of significant gravity. There is something about the tactile nature of ink on a page that discourages the fleeting nature of digital promises. Violet entered the room, moving with the practiced grace of someone who spent 3 mornings a week in a boutique Pilates studio. She was wearing a cashmere lounge set that probably cost more than my first car. She poured a splash of vintage Sancerre and drifted over to look at the papers. "What's this, Isaac?" she asked, her voice light but sharp. "A new project? A new trajectory," I said. "Sterling Infrastructure. They want me to head up the security architecture for the Project Aegis Hub." She scanned the document. She didn't look at the job description. Her eyes went straight to the location. "Fairhope? I've never heard of it. It's on the coast, about 5 hours north. It's a quiet community, very stable, very secure." Her expression shifted. It was a fascinating transition to watch, the sudden tightening of the muscles around the eyes, the subtle flare of the nostrils. It was the biological response to a perceived territorial threat. "You're joking. You have to be. I rarely joke about 6-figure differentials, Violet. The compensation package is $310,000 base." She set her wine glass down with a sharp clack on the wood. "I don't care if it's $1 million. I am not moving to a fishing village. Isaac, look at our life here. We have everything. My pottery collective is here. My friends are here. Eloise and I just joined the committee for the autumnal conservatory gala. You can't seriously expect me to trade all of that for a town where the social highlight is a church bake sale." I observed her with the same detached curiosity I applied to a failing server rack. I noticed that her list of everything was entirely comprised of her own activities. I wasn't on the list. The health of our marriage wasn't on the list. Even our shared home was mentioned only as a backdrop for her social standing. The move would allow us to acquire a primary residence on the water, I noted. The cost of living in Fairhope is 40% lower than it is here. We could retire in 10 years. I don't want to retire in 10 years. I want to live now. She gestured vaguely at the window, toward the shimmering city. My life is here. My yoga, my lunches at the bistro, the museum openings. Do you know what they have in towns like Fairhope? They have mosquitoes and boredom. Tell them no. I'm going to run the final projections, I said, my voice maintaining its steady, rhythmic frequency. I was entirely immune to the rising heat in her tone. Anger is an inefficient emotion. It clouds the analytical mind and provides no tangible data. There are no projections, she snapped. We aren't going. End of discussion. You are not going, I corrected, gently but firmly. I haven't reached a conclusion regarding my own movements yet. She froze. The gaslighting attempt, a phrase she liked to use whenever I cited facts she disliked, was currently being bypassed by my refusal to engage with her emotional framing. What is that supposed to mean? It means we are facing a divergence in our personal priorities. You have defined your boundary. I am in the process of defining mine. You're bluffing, she said, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. You wouldn't know what to do without me. You'd be some lonely geek in a cottage eating canned soup. I didn't argue. Argument is just a waste of breath when the logic is already sound. I went into my study, closed the door, and spent the next hour drafting an acceptance email. I requested a start date in 3 weeks. I didn't feel a surge of adrenaline or a pang of guilt. I felt the quiet, humming satisfaction of a system being optimized. The next 3 weeks were a study in domestic cold warfare. Violet adopted a strategy of tactical silence, punctuated by occasional outbursts of performative grief. She would sigh loudly while scrolling through real estate listings for penthouses we couldn't afford, or she would spend hours on the phone with Eloise, making sure I could hear her discussing their plans for the winter season. I remained a ghost in my own home. I packed my belongings, my books, my specialized hardware, my wardrobe, into high-quality, weatherproof crates. I didn't touch the curated items. I left the artisan ceramics. I left the expensive, uncomfortable furniture. I left the gala programs and the dried flowers from events I'd been dragged to like a decorative accessory. On the morning of my departure, the air was thick with the humidity of a city that never felt clean. I had hired a professional moving crew for the heavy lifting, but I insisted on driving my own car, a reliable, well-maintained German sedan that I had serviced a week prior. Violet stood on the balcony, wrapped in a silk robe, watching the movers. She looked like a tragic figure from a mid-century play. This is a mistake, Isaac. You'll be calling me within a month, begging to come back to reality. Reality is where the data is, Violet, I said as I adjusted my sunglasses. And the data is north of here. I had already signed a lease for a carriage house on the bluff in Fairhope. I had also opened a private bank account and diverted my new direct deposit there. I left her with the apartment lease, which was in both our names, and enough in our joint account to cover 3 months of her current lifestyle. After that, the math would become her problem. The drive was a 5-hour meditation. As the skyscrapers gave way to suburban sprawl, and the sprawl eventually surrendered to rolling hills and then coastal pine forests, I felt my internal processor speed increase. The noise was fading. Fairhope was everything the city was not. The air tasted of salt and crushed needles. The houses were built of weathered cedar and stone, designed to endure the elements rather than impress the neighbors. My carriage house sat on a granite bluff overlooking the gray-blue expanse of the bay. It had a workshop, a massive stone fireplace, and a window that offered a perfect view of the horizon. The data fortress, Project Aegis, was an architectural marvel. It was buried 300 feet into the limestone, a subterranean cathedral of silicon and steel. My supervisor, Silas, was a man in his late 50s with a background in naval intelligence. He didn't care about my social pedigree or my choice in neckties. He cared about the integrity of the firewall. "You settling in?" he asked on my third day, as we stood in the cooling room, the hum of the servers a steady, white noise lullaby. "The latency is lower here," I said, in every sense of the word. He chuckled. "It's a different pace. Some guys can't handle the silence. They start hearing their own thoughts too clearly, and it scares them." "I've always preferred my own thoughts to the alternatives," I replied. By the end of the first month, I had established a routine that was a masterpiece of efficiency. I woke at 5:30 a.m., ran 4 miles along the coastal path, spent 10 hours at the fortress, and returned home to cook simple, high-protein meals. I joined a small, local gymnasium that cost $30 a month. It didn't have a juice bar or a towel service, but the squat rack was always available. Violet's text began as a trickle and eventually became a flood. "The air conditioner in the bedroom is making a clicking sound. Who do I call? Eloise and Kaysen are asking when you're coming down for the yacht club mixer. I'm assuming this little tantrum is almost over." I responded to the logistics and ignored the provocations. When the rent for the city apartment came due, I sent her my half of the payment via digital transfer, along with a brief note. "This represents the final automated payment for the metropolitan residents. Future obligations will require a restructuring of your personal budget." The phone call came 30 seconds later. I answered it while sitting on my deck, watching a storm roll in over the water. "Are you insane?" she screamed. I didn't even have to hold the phone to my ear. "I can't pay for this place on my own. My pottery studio fees are due, and I have the gala deposit." "Then it appears you have a deficit in your cash flow," I said, my voice as calm as the eye of the hurricane. "I suggest looking into a sublet or seeking employment that aligns with your overhead. You're abandoning me. You're my husband. You have a legal obligation." "I am fulfilling my legal obligation by covering the remaining term of the lease as specified in our separation agreement, which my lawyer should be delivering to you by courier tomorrow morning." "Separation?" "Isaac, stop this. It's not funny anymore. I'm not laughing, Violet. I'm calculating. Our marriage was a series of high-cost investments with diminishing returns. I've decided to divest." She hung up. I went back to my book. The social life in Fairhope was subtle but genuine. There were no galas, but there were Saturday night bonfires on the beach. Silas invited me to a dinner at his home, a sprawling, comfortable house filled with books and the smell of wood smoke. His wife, a soft-spoken woman who ran a local bird sanctuary, treated me like a human being rather than a paycheck with a pulse. It was there that I met Maisie. She was the town's head librarian, a woman with sharp, observant eyes and a laugh that sounded like silver bells. She didn't ask me what I did for a living to gauge my status. She asked me what I was reading to gauge my mind. "You have the look of someone who has recently escaped something," she said, leaning against the porch railing as we watched the fireflies. "I've relocated to a higher altitude perspective," I said. "Fairhope does that to people," she smiled. "It either makes you very peaceful or very restless. Which one are you?" "I'm optimized," I said, and for the first time in years, I meant it. The pivot, as I later called it, happened about 3 months into my tenure at Sterling. One of my colleagues, a younger engineer named Kaysen, had posted a photo on a professional networking site. It was a picture of our team standing in front of the Aegis entrance after we'd successfully fended off a massive brute force attack from a state-sponsored actor. We looked exhausted, triumphant, and distinctly professional. In the background, the Sterling logo was visible, along with a glimpse of the high-tech interior. Violet's friend Eloise apparently spent her days monitoring the digital footprints of anyone with a higher net worth than her own. She saw the post. She saw the lead architect title. She saw the Sterling infrastructure branding. And, most importantly, she looked up the Glassdoor ratings for executive-level cybersecurity roles in the infrastructure sector. The phone rang on a Tuesday evening. I knew it was her before I looked. The frequency of her calls always increased when there was a perceived shift in the financial weather. "Isaac," she said, her voice now a melodic coo. It was the sound of a predator mimicking a songbird. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us. About how I reacted when you first got the offer." "I recall the reaction quite clearly," I said. "You mentioned mosquitoes and a lack of espresso. I was just scared. It was such a big change, and I felt like you were leaving me behind. But I've been talking to Eloise, and she says Fairhope is actually becoming quite the hidden gem. Very exclusive, very private. Translation: Eloise told you I'm making 3 times what I used to, and suddenly the fishing village is exclusive. The exclusivity is a byproduct of the geography," I said. "It remains a town with 1 grocery store and no gala committee. I could live with that. I really could. I miss you, Isaac. The apartment feels so empty. I think I'm ready to give our marriage another chance. I could come up this weekend. We could look at houses. I already have a house, Violet. Well, for us, something bigger. Something that fits, our new status." "My status hasn't changed," I said. "Only my income has. And my income is currently spoken for." "What does that mean?" "It means I've invested in my own stability. I'm not interested in reinvesting in your social calendar. You're being incredibly cruel. I'm trying to fix our family. We aren't a family, Violet. We were a predatory lending agreement. You provided the social validation, and I provided the capital. I've found that the market for social validation is currently in a bubble. So I've exited the position." It was a long silence. I could hear her breathing, shallow, angry pants. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Sitting up there in your little fortress, judging me." "I'm not judging you. I'm observing you. There's a difference." She stayed in the city for another month, but the tone of her messages shifted from pleading to strategic. She began checking in on my health, asking if I needed anything from the city, and mentioning how much she missed our quiet nights nights that had never actually existed. Finally, she decided that a digital approach was insufficient. She drove up. I came home from the fortress on a Friday afternoon to find her white SUV parked in my gravel driveway. She was sitting on the porch steps, looking entirely out of place in a designer wrap dress and stilettos. The salt air was already beginning to wreak havoc on her blowout. "You didn't answer my texts," she said, standing up. She tried to look vulnerable, but she looked like a salesperson whose lead was cooling off. "I was in a shielded environment," I said, unlocking the door. "What are you doing here, Violet?" "I wanted to see it. I wanted to see where you've been living." She followed me inside. I watched her eyes do a rapid-fire inventory of the room. She looked at the Danish modern furniture, the high-end workstation, and the absence of any of her curated clutter. She looked at the view of the bay. "It's nice," she said, though her voice betrayed her disappointment. It wasn't a mansion. It was a home. A bit small, though. For 2 people. "It's perfect for 1, I said. She sat on the sofa, crossing her legs. "Isaac, I'm serious about this. I've looked at the galleries in town. I think I could really contribute here. We could be the power couple of Fairhope. Think of what we could do with your new salary. We could host events, bring some real culture to this place." I sat in the armchair across from her. I didn't offer her a drink. "Violet, let's be precise. You didn't drive 5 hours because you miss my company. You drove 5 hours because Eloise told you that Sterling pays their lead architects a base of $310 plus bonuses." Her face went pale, then flushed. That's not. Don't lie. It's a waste of both our time. You spent 7 years treating me like a utility company. You didn't care about the work I did, the hours I pulled, or the stress I was under, as long as the checks cleared and the lifestyle was maintained. Now, you've realized that the utility company has moved its headquarters and doubled its output, and you want back on the grid. I'm your wife, she shouted, her composure finally shattering. I supported you. I gave you my best years. You didn't support me. You decorated me. And as for your best years, you spent them in boutique fitness classes and at brunch. I paid for those years. I consider the debts settled. You're a robot, she spat. You're cold and robotic, and you don't have a soul. I have a soul, Violet. I just don't have a budget for your drama anymore. It's an expense I've pruned from my ledger. She stayed in a local hotel that night, the most expensive one, naturally, and sent me the bill. I ignored it. The next morning, she showed up at my door again, this time in yoga gear, trying a different angle. Is there a good studio in town? She asked, her voice tight. There's a community center, I said. But I suspect the demographic isn't what you're looking for. It's mostly retirees and people who actually want to exercise. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw the realization hit her. She realized that she had no leverage. She couldn't shame me because I didn't care about her social circles. She couldn't manipulate me because I saw the mechanics of her every move. She couldn't bankrupt me because I had already secured the perimeter. So that's it, she asked. You just done? I've been done for a long time, Violet. I just finally found a location that allowed me to finish the process. She left an hour later. I watched her SUV disappear down the winding coastal road. I felt a profound sense of equilibrium. The divorce was surprisingly straightforward. Once she realized that I was prepared to litigate every cent of the sterling salary as post-separation income, she became much more amenable to a settlement. I was generous with the city assets. I gave her the apartment, the furniture, and a significant portion of our shared savings. I kept my freedom and my future earnings. The final papers were signed 6 months after I moved to Fairhope. I celebrated by taking Maisie out to a small restaurant on the pier. We ate fresh oysters and drank local beer. Is it official? She asked, her eyes reflecting the moonlight on the water. The system is clean, I said. No legacy errors. No background noise. Good, she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Her skin was warm, real. I think you've spent enough time debugging your past. It's time to start building something new. A year into my new life, I was promoted to Director of Regional Security. The salary increase was substantial, but more importantly, I was given total autonomy over the Aegis project. I bought the carriage house and the 5 acres of bluff surrounding it. I built a state-of-the-art garden for Maisie and a library that smelled of old paper and new beginnings. I ran into Kaysen at the tavern one evening. He had heard about the divorce through the grapevine. You doing okay, Isaac? I know it's been a rough year. Rough isn't the word I'd use, I said, watching Maisie across the room as she laughed with Silas's wife. What word would you use? Optimal, I said. 2 years after the move, I received a final email from Violet. She had moved into a smaller place in a less fashionable part of the city. She was trying to sell her pottery online. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to endorse her to some of my professional contacts. I read the email twice. I thought about the man I used to be, the one who would have felt a twinge of guilt, who would have tried to help just to keep the peace. Then I looked out the window at the bay, at the home I'd built, and at the woman who loved me for the mind I possessed rather than the things I could buy. I deleted the email without responding. The frame, as I called it, was finally complete. I had built a life that was resilient, efficient, and filled with genuine value. My ex-wife had been right about one thing. Fairhope had changed me. It had stripped away the layers of pretense and left only the core architecture. And the architecture was beautiful. I stood on my deck that night, the salt air cool against my skin. The lighthouse in the distance swept its beam across the water, a steady, rhythmic pulse in the dark. I was a long way from the city, a long way from the galas and the ceramics and the silk. I was exactly where the data said I should be. I was home.
Thanks for listening.